episode on the HN Haus podcast, and it's Hannah Nieves. And I am joined by my dear friend, Ashley Stahl. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited because this woman, has a background in counterterrorism, working for the Pentagon. I don't think I've actually ever met anyone with your background before. So I'm excited to dive in. I used to support people with TEDx and all the things. So before we dive in, can you just paint the picture of what did this journey look like? What are you doing now? And then we'll dive in.
Yeah, as far as getting into national security, I grew up in a house where the news was always on. And when I was super young, I kind of just knew what was happening in the world. And when 9/11 happened, I feel like if you're a millennial,
Yeah.
or any generation older than millennials, they kind of know where they were standing when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And that's how memory works, right? Like your memory doesn't pick up, like you can't remember what you were doing last Wednesday afternoon, but you can if there's like a big storm or a big government event or something really notable in your memory. And so I think so many people like me just hold that day in their awareness and everything changed. And I just remember being really good at learning languages. And I've always been a protector. I've always valued integrity a lot. And I thought, like, where better to do that than the government? And I was really lost in my 20s. So I just figured this, or in my late teens. And so when I, went to college, I just thought I might as well study this because I don't know what else to do. It's not like I feel like there's not enough real guidance. And
Yeah.
so that translated into me pouring my entire self into national security. I got 3 majors, government history and French, went to graduate school in the UK. I studied at the Department of War at King's College London, got my
Big deal.
graduate degree, and later would go on to get a graduate degree in psychology, which is like maybe there's a causal relationship looking back, like so much
Yeah.
war. Maybe I need like some healing. I'm not sure. But yeah, I ended up finishing grad school, moving to DC with no options and barely any money, and networking my way into the Pentagon. I had like
Wow.
3 or 4 job offers, and it was the recession, and I had so many friends from London who did better in school than I did. And they were asking me, like, how did you get this offer? And I wasn't just at the Pentagon with my offer, I was running a program for them. It was like an $80 million program. I was replacing a colonel who was like in his 60s. And the reason I got this opportunity was kind of like a fluke. They just needed somebody energetic that wasn't going to delegate the work because colonels are very well trained in delegating. And like that's not what they needed
Yeah.
I was a defense contractor. So the only difference between being a contractor and a government employee is the color of your badge and whether you go to an office sometimes or not. And usually if you're a contractor, you get a bigger paycheck. So I ended up
Mhm.
doing that and I learned so much. Especially about myself, I learned that I'm way more sensitive than I realized. I learned that my core skill set is writing, and I knew that, but there are so many times we misunderstand our core skill set. And I wrote a whole book. It's called
Mm.
U-Turn, and it's all about this. The message of the book is don't do what you love, do what you are. And I talk about 10 core skill sets in there. And it's interesting because I think we often misunderstand our skill set. That's what happened to me. I thought, oh, great, I'm writing intelligence reports. But that was a very detail-oriented job. I'm very much an innovator and an entrepreneur who's a big picture thinker. I
Yeah.
don't like details. And writing
Same.
intelligence reports is like a data-based analysis job. And analysis is almost the opposite side of your brain from creative writing. So just because
Yeah.
I was writing analytical shit, not, you know, reflective creative writing. So fast forward, I left the Pentagon and got the courage to do it. I created an online business. I became an
Mhm.
expert in webinars after a lot of failure at writing webinar scripts. I scaled $1,000 course for job seekers on how to get a job, everything I learned to get into the Pentagon. We ended up having 7,000 people. It was $1,000 course, and in 2 months, all the people joined. So I
Wow.
went from extreme debt to like 7, 6, 5, million dollars in revenue.
Mhm.
And then I had a huge failure. I didn't have the mindset to carry all of it. I didn't know how to manage money. I was like 26 and I ended with, had 10 employees and all this stuff. And then I went under completely. I held on too long, got attached to fixing my funnel too long, and I ended up with nothing. I ended up with negative
Wow.
500K. I spent 3 years paying it off. And in those years, all these things happened for me. My first TEDx talk came when I was at the Pentagon,
Mhm.
and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was lucky enough to go to Obama's speechwriters because I was working in Obama administration.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey guys, I have this TEDx thing. I'm 24. I've never spoken on a stage in my life. There's 4,000 people at TEDx Berkeley. All TEDx talks have different sizes. Can you guys help me? And a couple of them were nice enough to say, yeah, let me show you how we structure his speeches. Like if it was a 10 to 19-minute thing, here's how much the intro would be. This is the points. I learned from that. And I never would have realized that would influence my life so much because I
Wow.
got on stage. The TEDx talk in 2013 or whenever I gave it, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great because I'd never spoken before. It went viral anyway.
Mhm.
And then 10 years later, I just felt like I need to redeem myself with myself. So when I was in all this debt, I got invited to give another TEDx talk. And
Wow.
I got on stage, I poured myself into it, and I knew it was going to go viral. And and then it didn't. Like nobody watched it for 6 months. And then one day it went crazy viral and it never stopped. So now I'm
Wow.
80th on the internet on the TEDx channel and the TED channel. One thing people don't know is if you have a TEDx talk that goes viral, the TED channel picks it up and you get a second wind. And both channels have 40 million people subscribed. So the algorithmic alchemy that can happen for you is very high.
Mhm.
And I attracted a $500,000 spokesperson deal. I attracted a speaking agent. He sent me on a speaking tour. And I paid off my debt talking about how broke I was from business. Like I talked about losing all my money and I made all my money back. And
Wow.
I started investing in real estate. People started asking me to write TEDx talks. Now, full time, I have a ghostwriting agency, and our only offer right now, we're building, but I'm very slow about the build,
Mhm.
is TEDx. We write book TEDx talks for people. And we've got 27 TEDx talks we're writing, and a third of them just right now on deck. We
Mhm.
wrote 40 last year, 39 got booked on stage. And the one that didn't get booked is really unfortunate. Her accent was so thick they couldn't understand the English. So I worked really hard to help her with her accent, although that's not my expertise. It felt really cringe to be in like a DEI. My heart, cares about that. So to have a business that has to be mindful of accents is a very odd
Wow.
situation. But the TEDx event planners will not book you if they can't understand you.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've just had a lot of success. So I've been slowly building. The company's
Mhm.
called Wise Whisper, and that's all
Mhm.
we do is we're the Wise Whisper.
Okay, I have about 50 million questions here when it comes to, first off, your story is just so powerful. First off, coming from this very, like male dominated and masculine environment of like working in counterterrorism in the Pentagon and, in government affairs, and then going into this entrepreneurial journey. But then also it's like, okay, you're also in your mid 20s when you had this like massive revenue and then lost it all. Can we just like go back there for a second? Because I feel like in this season, especially for the listeners of the podcast, a lot of them are in this like reinvention era of what they're doing. And I know that I'm sure you probably have experienced this as well, but like there's been a lot of shifts of people leaving the industry, losing a lot from the industry, starting up again. What were some of the mindset shifts that you had to go through during that time to really get back into it, Or did you not think that you were going to come back into the industry? I'm just curious, like what you went through during that time.
Yeah, I think, there's so much that went on over the years. Like I started my podcast, U-Turn Podcast in 2018. I remember thinking, oh, I'm too late to start podcasting. And nobody's too late. I mean, the industry is still moving in such a powerful
Hmm.
way. I think
Yeah.
I read it. Do you remember that stat? It's like 5 million shows exist, but only 470,000
It's
have
like a
released
small
an episode.
percentage. Yep.
Yeah, in the past 90 days. It's like, okay, if you think about how many hundreds of millions of YouTube channels there are, it's like 470,000 podcasts releasing in the past 90 days is nothing. There's so
Wow.
much room in the market. But yeah, along the way, there was so many course corrections. And I think I went through that thing that everybody goes through is like this spiritual sickness of like,
Hmm.
why am I even doing what I'm doing? Like, what's
Yeah.
the point? And like, it's so sad because I think as entrepreneurs, I had so much success and so much failure, and I was so burnt out that for about 4 years, I did my private coaching practice. And because I had developed such a large email list from my webinar doing well and selling my courses, I had about 500,000 people on there. So my private practice was always full. And that was a blessing in that era.
Yeah.
But I was so burned out. I remember just being like, I can't take on more than 4 clients a week. Like this is my max. And no matter how good I was at career coaching, I felt so held hostage by who I used to be and unclear on who I was wanting to be.
Ooh.
I think like so many people go through this where they're like, how do I pivot? How do I become the
Mm-hmm.
next me? And the problem, and it's not really a problem, but a lot of us relate to it that way, is that we can't force clarity. We have seasons. And it
Mm-hmm.
took me every bit of those 4 years to release the burnout and get the fire in me and get the clarity for this TEDx offer of like writing and booking your TEDx talk. And, to find the booker who had 100% success getting people booked so I wouldn't have problems with the offer, right? Like finding your people and crystallizing ideas. And I think people forget, it's like in those times you ask yourself many questions like, how am I going to stay relevant? And
Feel
you
that.
don't want to pivot, right? Like you have an audience you built or whatever you did. And the thing is, we forget, and I get this from Andrea Crowder, my really good friend. Her and I were
Mm-hmm.
talking about relevance, and she was saying what people really want is not relevance, they want resonance.
Ooh,
And
that's
what
good.
makes you relevant is when you resonate. And
Mm-hmm.
in order to resonate with people, you need to deeply resonate with yourself, right?
Mm.
Like a deep sense of resonance behind what you're doing. People feel that. So people look at their, following and they're like, oh, I'm a fitness influencer or whatever. And I don't know how I can become a food blogger or whatever. And it's like, it's not about the title and being relevant as that title. It's about your deeper resonance. And will that audience feel enrolled in the vision that you're enrolled in and want to follow you? Because people want to be with people who are alive. And it's really that simple. And a lot of people, unfortunately, don't feel very alive. They don't feel very mentally well.
Yeah.
And they don't feel very motivated because it's very unmotivating to do work you don't want to do. Common sense. Most people feel cornered, like they have to just do something.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth that I've discovered is you do have to kind of just do something to support yourself and pay your bills in the in-between years. But
Mm-hmm.
be honest with yourself. Like, how much money do you need to make to pay your bills? Can you open up some space on your calendar in that burnout time? How can you start to reconnect to yourself and be you again? And that has been what's led me to having such a successful business. It feels like I've pulled $1 million company out of my ass, honestly. And it's been
Mm-hmm.
nothing but a good time. 40 TEDx talks written last year. We already have 27 on deck this year, and it's been just a few months. So it's like the amount of growth we're doing, the amount of scaling I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing, and I have to scale slow because of the talent that I pick. But it's like, I don't think this kind of magic exists unless you really honor your pivot and
Mm-hmm.
honor your time and you
Yeah.
continue to connect to your resonance.
Ooh, I feel like there are so many things I need to come back and rewind from this episode with just that alone, because I think the fact of you also taking 4 years to figure that out is really, really powerful. Question for you. Did you do any, I don't know, like in your spiritual journey of connecting to yourself, were there anything that worked for you, whether it's more like mindset related or spiritual or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think the first order of business when you're feeling cut off from yourself is to reconnect from yourself. Too many people are like, what's the next job I want to do? Like, I'm feeling lost. Let me grab onto
Mm-hmm.
something. And I think it's really valid to feel that way. It's like nobody wants to just be lost in the sauce. It's really uncomfortable. But the reality is that there's a dignity to process.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never rob whoever you are listening, wherever you are. Like, I would never want to rob you the dignity of your process. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that process can be ugly, it can be uncomfortable, it can be upsetting, but there's dignity to that and there's an importance to that. And if you look at any successful person, it is so rare and unusual when they were just a straight shot into the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just don't hit the puck straight into the goalpost. That's just not how success tends to work. It's trial and error. I had a $500,000 debt failure. And, all these people in my life were like, you could have claimed bankruptcy. And my ego was like, no, I want to pay this off. I made up this mess. I'm going to clean it. I spent years
Mm,
cleaning it. I don't know if it was the right decision, but it's what my integrity told me to do. Um, but for people who feel cut off, I think the thing is like, make a list of people and places and things that make you feel like you. So for me, I used to live in New York, but I'm from California, originally LA. And I go to the beach, like put my feet in the water and the sand, and it's like, oh, I'm here, And
mhm,
so I would go to the beach all the time when I felt lost. Even in New York, I would go to the water in
mhm,
Brooklyn. It did something for me. I started taking hip hop dance classes that did something for me.
mhm,
Doesn't have to be expensive things, right? And like cut my schedule down. Also, I think building your personal brand is one of the most powerful things you can do in the in-between, because no
mhm,
matter what you're selling, or maybe you're an entrepreneur now, you don't even know what you want to sell. If you can build an audience that like is really behind you and believes in you and resonates
mhm,
with you, you're in an incredible position to roll out an offer at any time. And again,
mhm,
it's not about relevance, it's about resonance, right? Like, I do understand the reality that, like, if all your ideal clients are like fishermen and you roll out like a beauty lipstick product, it's not going to resonate.
Yeah.
But I do think that as you build businesses, it's a little more nebulous in the gray than that. And we live in the gray. So, I don't think there's anything that has built or influenced my personal brand quite like the TEDx channel. Like for
Mhm,
me to do that. And I think, we are a high-end service, writing and booking TEDx talks, but you can absolutely do this yourself. It's just a lot of work.
mm.
We write and book the talk in 4 Zoom calls. So it's 4 Zoom calls for the client. They don't have to do anything else. And our speech writing team is on them and we're doing all this stuff. But I'd imagine a good speech, like when I wrote my own and did it, and I'm a natural born writer. So if you're not, a good rough draft, and then you need to find a writer to write for you, right? Like that
Mhm.
took me like 3 weeks of writing all the time, like, because I
Wow.
just kept feeling into it. But I wanted it to go viral and I knew it would be my best work. And it was, and it did. So I think it's also remembering it may not be easy to go viral, but it's pretty simple. Like,
Mhm,
simply do the best work you've ever done. Like,
mhm.
good shit goes viral. Like, period.
Yeah.
It's not, yes, you need a title. Like, you're not going to go viral without the click. But after that, it's good content is what does the lifting.
I love that. And I'd love to shift gears into the TED Talk specifically, because this is something that I see coming up for our audience a lot. And a lot of our, listeners here are thinking about, okay, the next iteration of what they want to create. So first off, can you just give us like the quick, like cliff notes of why is having a TED Talk so powerful for your personal brand to begin with? And then we'll dive
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. I think the first thing is like, where else do you have an opportunity? Where else is there a platform that people want to listen to you for as long as 15 minutes, maybe podcasting, right? But that has 40 million people following it.
Mhm.
It's like if you're good, you'll break through the noise on that. And you have people that are thirsty to hear you. Like the subscribers of TEDx and TED are learners, and they're specifically the talks we're seeing go most viral are self-development and educational, right? So if you are a content creator, a service provider, an expert of sorts, this is the place. Like a third of the talks I've been writing with my team are going viral, which to me means 100,000 views a month
Wow.
at the outset. Or, same thing as me. They don't, and then they do. Um, and I think the most important thing to ask yourself is how
Mhm.
devoted are you, right? Because, like, again, you don't need somebody like me. One of the biggest things I've also learned about, going viral. And did I lose your question? Because you asked me about like the point of the platform, right? Like the
Yeah,
value
like
of it.
Why is it so important? And then
Yeah.
second to that would be, you know, where do people have to start, which I think you're
Yeah.
starting to get into. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like kind of I touched on it's like if you do well on the TEDx channel, the TED channel picks you up. So then you get a second wind. And then if you're there, usually a bunch of translators will translate you into multiple languages. So it's
Wow.
essentially the gift that keeps giving. And I think the thing that it changed for me was instead of being in masculine energy for my brand, always in pursuit, always trying to create the next thing,
Mhm.
TEDx put me into feminine energy. It was one and done. It was set it and forget it, which I think we all strive for as entrepreneurs. If you think about the internet and personal brand, it's like it's a bunch of islands, right? There's like the podcast island. Like Hannah and I both have shows, which I'm really excited to have you on
Mhm.
my show, Hannah.
Mhm. Me
Um,
too.
and that's an island. If you have your own show, it's a bunch of episodes. And it's not just about the day
Mhm.
you release the episode, it's about every day people finding the episode and searching the episode. And um, it's like this entity that lives there, right? Or if you don't have a podcast, but you're guesting on a lot of podcasts, it's like you go on tour and you pepper yourself everywhere. That's an island on your personal brand.
Mhm.
TEDx is the only island of branding I know that's a one and done. You prepare, you deliver, you don't need to think about it again.
Mm.
There's
Yeah.
some guidelines for it that I'm really aware of as a speech writing house. Um, we've been having some politicians and senators and presidential candidates come find us, like, for their campaign trail speech because they're like, oh, that's like a TEDx talk. And I'm just like, okay, no, I don't want to pull my writers that I very carefully found for TEDx onto these other
Yeah.
projects. But coming from politics, I think a lot about branding because if you don't create your brand, people will create it for you.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
think about political scandals. Like, think about presidents or senators or whatever that did something wrong, and it's like clearly wrong. If they have a brand, they bounce back pretty quick.
Mhm.
Think about the victim of these scandals. Like they spend their
Mhm.
whole life trying to fix their brand because it never existed. And then they're, you know, having
Mhm.
to resuscitate something that didn't exist, which is a brand. So make it for yourself or people will make it for you. And I'd rather you control the narrative and pick islands that are powerful, right? Like the blogging island is powerful. I wrote for Forbes for 10 years. I just gave up my column because I don't have time to do it anymore. Um, that was a I had 600 blog posts on that island after 10 years, right? Like
Wow.
it's an entity. But those 600 blog posts took me way longer than one TEDx talk, writing it, booking it, giving it. And I tell clients all the time, like a TEDx talk is 9 to 19 minutes. Why would you write a 19-minute talk? Why would you make yourself memorize that much? So we've been writing shorter talks for clients, advising them to do like a 12-minute talk because shorter does just as well, if not better, with
Love that.
virality. It's less work. It's about 3 to 4 pages typed. So that gives people an idea on how memorizable
To
it is.
memorize it. Mhm.
We tell people you got to memorize it, but where else do you have something this potent for your brand?
I love this. I'm curious with for people when they're ready to work with you, right?
Yeah.
And have the support, like what are some of the things that you look for in a potential client candidate for something like this? Do they need to have I know this is going to come up, like, do I have to have a certain amount of Instagram followers
Yeah.
or, things like that? Like what should they have prepared before?
Yeah, TEDx is a democracy, and that's why I love it. Like, it's not about how many followers you have. It is about
Love that.
continuity. So if you're doing a talk about energy healing, which I have a whole thought about because TED has a lot of guidelines and you can get pulled off the TED channel if you don't play it right.
Mm,
Um, if you do a talk about energy healing, but you're a project manager at a tech company, they don't see the continuity, they're not going to book you. So you need to make sense. Your topic needs to make sense based on who you are appearing to be, even if you don't have a brand except for your LinkedIn profile. Um, continuity. Another thing is contrarian message. So the message of my book U-Turn, the message of my first TEDx talk, and even kind of ingrained in my second, but not so much the second, is don't do what you love, do what you are.
mm,
It's don't follow your passion, right? And I know that got really trendy. Like my TED talk was in like 2012 or something. And I think in the 5 years following that, I heard a lot of don't follow your passion stuff, which is cool because people need the message. That was my core message I came up with. And it was contrarian at the time. Nobody was saying that. So it's like, that's what you need to think is, what's your take on it? I think about my podcast and, you get it. You get pitched all the time for your show.
Mhm.
And I remember a relationship expert messaged me and she said something like, relationships don't fail because of communication. They fail because of tit for tat and keep people
Yeah.
keeping score. And that immediately got my attention. I was like, cool, like that's different. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I would love to understand that. So
Mhm.
that really resonated for me to kind of start to wrap my arms around what pitches. It's like taking what everybody thinks and giving your new lens on it. And here's the thing, and I hate to be the person to say it, but I know that I'm a content creator. Like, I don't necessarily think I'm an influencer as far as like getting on Instagram
Mhm.
and, I've done the sponsor deal thing and the, sponsors for the show and brand deals. I was spokesperson for SoFi for 5 years. So I understand that world, but I don't think that's how I create content. Like, I don't have the patience for like what's going to get the clicks or the views.
Mhm.
But I do have a lot of original thought, and I think that comes from reading a lot, getting my master's in spiritual psychology, coaching hundreds of people, having a lot of failure in life experiences. Not everyone has an authentic, original take. And it's not about having something new to say all the time fully, but it is about being a curator of information and delivering
Yeah.
it in a way that it feels new for the way people are experiencing it. And that's not about being fake and like, let me make this
Mhm.
packaged in a way. That's about being you. And I think, so for example, people talk about salary negotiation all the time. I have 3 online courses and they still are hiding on my website about how to get a job, how to figure out which job, launching a business, podcast, whatever, all these things that I don't
Mhm.
advertise. And I talk about in my job hunting course salary negotiation. And I talk about like, I'm probably giving advice people have. It's what I did. It's what worked for me. And I've read and taken a lot of negotiation classes at UCLA. It's what I believe. But the thing that's original is my spirituality, my it's like fairy dust. So
Mhm.
I talk about my mantra, high intention, low attachment. Like that's my
Yeah.
mantra for salary negotiation. Like be intentional, but don't be attached. I talk about say your number like you're ordering a sandwich at Subway, like neutral. Do you want pickles? Do you want onions? Like, so there's like some ways I'm delivering my content that is not
Yeah.
just giving the tactical practical. And it's not about putting in fluff, but it's about being able to deliver. It's also like I read so many development books that I'm like pulling on work from Osho. I'm pulling on work from Joe Dispenza. I'm pulling on work from all these different leaders. And I'm saying like, okay, Joe Dispenza talks about this. John Assaraf talks about this with neuroscience. This is how this applies to salary negotiate. So I'm taking all these voices and I'm giving my take on the voices. So I
Mhm.
think that's important for people to remember. All of it said, not everyone is meant to be doing a TEDx talk, and it doesn't mean being a TEDx speaker is superior in to anything. Like, I think if you really have something to say, it makes sense for you to
Mhm.
give a talk. A third of our clients are like famous doctors or mental health practitioners, New York Times, whatever,
Mhm.
celebrities. A third of them are like corporate professionals, executives, vice presidents, whatever, managers that have a voice, they have something to say, they have a story. And
Yeah.
then a third are like activists or humans that have had wild experiences.
Wow.
Um, the activist doesn't have a brand. She cares about animal rights and people fostering dogs, and that's her message, that's her focus. Um, and she put her life savings into working with us, which I advised her against. I was like, this is a great investment, but not that great. Like, don't give me your life
Mhm.
savings, but she wanted to go viral and get the message out about fostering dogs. And so
Yeah.
it's like she's in veterinary school. Everybody has a different place that they're in when they choose to do this.
Ooh, I love that. And I love that you're just showcasing all the different walks of life that come to work with you too. Okay,
Yeah.
my last question on this, because this is something that has come up. We've done podcast episodes on this, which is writing a book, authoring a book. And do you think, and or for people listening in that are like, I want to do both, because the big thing I keep hearing from at least our client base is maybe they're in the service-based business model or digital products or physical products, whatever it is, but now they're thinking about like the legacy planning of like what's next. Do
Yeah.
you think having the book beforehand or afterhand is going to help or hurt them? Or is it something that you kind of like birth together?
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. You can't time TEDx because once you get booked, like, so to give you an example, like we spend 2 months writing the TEDx talk for the client. We do 4 meetings with the client, and behind the scenes, we're meeting all the time, taking,
Mhm.
and we do up to 5 hours of reading of their materials, right? So they might give us a book or et cetera, et cetera. After that 2 months, we hand it off to the booker, and it takes her anywhere from 6 to 12 months to get a yes, right? So after she gets that yes, um, then the event runs 3 to 6 months out. So my point is, this is not a kind of platform that you do something that's trending on TikTok. It works on its
Mm,
own timeline, right? Um, and I think that that's important in the sense where you really have to honor that, like, you can't create anything on a timeline or a trend. It's timeless work.
mm,
The most important thing and we provide it. So we write the talk, book the talk, we make the slides, we make the bio, and we do speaking coaching for an hour and a half, and we provide title suggestions. So the thing that's
amazing.
important is beneath the TEDx talk is the bio. And for the first 80 words, you can see what it says beneath the talk, and then it says read more, and you have to click it. Nobody's going to click it. So what that means to me is that people really need to be clear on who they are. So if you don't have a book out yet, in that bio, put the words impending author. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
indicate that it's coming so that people know to search for that. So I think that's just a good example on a way
Way
that
to
you
do
can
it.
handle it.
I love that. I love that. This is so good. And I feel like we need to do like a part two of TED and just all the things. And I'm excited to put all the links. So for you guys that are listening in that are like, oh my goodness, I need to work with Ashley and their
Yeah.
team. I'm going to put the links below, but like, where can people connect with you on Instagram? And I'll make sure everything is linked for everyone that's listening in.
Yeah, I'm so honored, and like thanks for asking me. I feel like I talked everybody's ear off. The best place to find out about what I'm doing is, I mean, we're rebranding because it happened so fast and we're finally getting our arms around to that. But it's ashleystahl.com/TEDx,
Mhm.
STAHL. Let me know you found me through Hannah because we'll give you $1,000 off if you get at us in the next couple of months within it releasing this episode.
Amazing.
Um, yeah, like just for this community. And yeah, I feel like otherwise my book U-Turn is everywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, whatever.
You're amazing. Thank you so much for
Mhm.
being here. And if you like this episode, please tag us on Instagram. We'd love to connect with you. Thanks for being here.